Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Thank you to the chair and ranking member for this important hearing. Thank you also to the panelists that are here today. Let me talk a little bit about 1269, which is the Environmental Justice and Recreation Permitting Act that I introduced. And very briefly again, really it requires DOI and Department of Ag to produce an interagency report regarding the impacts and challenges that the current recreational permitting process that we are talking about poses on access to public lands for our communities of color, for low-income communities and tribal and indigenous communities. I think this bill is a perfect example of how we can work to address and tear down barriers to people accessing, along with the permitting challenges that we have, and that's why I support and I'm a co-sponsor of the SOAR Act as well. But to the two agencies, let me ask you this. I also understand there are two executive orders that were introduced by this administration, and I appreciate your support for 1269 and your goal, I understand, and I support this as well, is to make it compatible along with those two executive orders. Is there anything else that I need to be aware of, Mr. French or Mr. Lambrick, with regard to this particular legislation that you have concerns about or you would like to see some correction?
In terms of the legislation, not that I can speak offhand other than my written comments, I will say that under the executive order, we're already seeing things that maybe weren't there before, and I think a report like this will be helpful. As an example, one of the issues we see is that we as an agency don't always advertise when new permit opportunities come available, and they tend to go to the same permittee over and over again. And so that creates a barrier often for underserved communities, environmental justice communities, business owners who are looking for those things and don't even know they exist. And then if you look at some of the things that are being tackled in the other two bills, as we've talked about here, the permitting requirements are complex. And for a new user, that can be a barrier itself. And I think we're uncovering pieces like that that I think will benefit all users, but will be very, very helpful in a report like this.
Thank you.
Senator Cortez Masto, I appreciate the question. Just wanted to convey to you, the Bureau of Land Management is serious about incorporating serving environmental justice communities into its mission in many program areas. One of the challenges that we see and identified in this legislation is identifying exactly where those environmental justice issues are. And I know the Environmental Protection Agency announced this week it's making some motion to try to map those areas that would be helpful information. And you know, I think the Park Service is making great progress on another program that would help us identify some of those communities and how we can increase their participation in our programs and better serve them. So you know, we have a 3-year deadline within the legislation to report back to Congress on progress in this area. Expect we'd be able to accommodate that, but would like to have further discussions with your staff on how we can exactly get you the information that you're looking for.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And so, Ms. Wall-Turner, in your written testimony, you touched on some of the economic hardships that obviously the COVID-19 pandemic continues to pose on small outdoor businesses and the gateway communities that rely on our public lands. In Nevada, there are many rural towns that serve as gateway communities. I'm wondering if you could please build on your recommendation for a first-of-its-kind outdoor recreation package that we are talking about, and how the bills being discussed today can contribute to our recovery efforts as well.
For the question, you know, we've had a lot of big packages where recreation legislation is sort of inserted at the last minute, you know, maybe at the end of a session, and where we've all come together, I think, as a community is to say there's enough here. There's so many systems that need reform. There's so many policies that haven't been updated. We can kind of live in our own space where recreation policy can be bipartisan, it can be bicameral, and we can get it done and have agreement like we do here today. And you know, we need it now more than ever as we're seeing this surge of visitation visitation. We're seeing communities that are not prepared for this. We're also seeing communities that are lacking the visitation they usually have. So we kind of have both sides of the coin, and then the tools that the agencies need, the new tools, the updated tools to be able to help support those communities. And I appreciate your bill that you introduced as well, because I think a lot of the new user groups that are getting out and new businesses are popping up, might not know to go to the Forest Service District Ranger site on page 4 and look at the bottom on how to, create a permit process. And so I think all of this goes into not just helping businesses and local communities, but making sure that everyone has access to these places. And if we're going to move into a 21st century recreation economy, we should do it with everyone at the table.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.